So not sure where I left off, but basically, okay, start over again. One of the big things is I want to make sure we've got everybody's wells on the tables. So I'll be emailing each of you a table specific to your water system. It'll look a lot like this. The data, there'll be a fair amount of information already populated in there. That's from information ranging in age from about 10 years ago to information that was contained in some of the tables in the wellhead protection report for the SAJB, the 2000 report. So going back a ways in time. And that information, by the way, from that report is particularly important relative to the column that's shown here in the purplish color. Back in 2000, when the wellhead protection areas were first delineated, we used certain pumping rates and certain assumptions about annual production that were basically all tied to water rights held by each purveyor for their wells, for their system. So you'll see numbers in here that I'll have populated in each of your individual tables that I'd like you to review and see if you all concur still that those are the numbers to use for the purpose of delineating capture zones. So that's columns L through O. The other aspect of capture zone delineation is columns P and Q. And what those have to do with is for how long a period we're going to conduct the delineations for. I'll be sending a document that, again, was an appendix in that 2000 report. It's Appendix I that described how these importance factors were derived and what their meaning were. And the importance factors were basically a multiplier where we said, let's take a 1-year travel time for groundwater and multiply it by a factor. It could even be a factor of 1. It could even be less than 1, but it could also be greater. And we'll multiply it by the factor, and that'll be how many years we want to do this delineation for. And those factors were tied to, I think it was 15 different scenarios that describe how wells are used and looked at issues like, what if the well went down? Could its flow be replaced by another well, that you, the purveyor, own, or maybe from an intertie that you have with another provider? It also looked at the distribution system. If that well goes down, then what is the ability of the distribution system to make up for that loss by maybe pumping at another well? If well A goes down and you suddenly want to pump well B twice as long, or maybe at 50% higher capacity or whatever the case may be, can your distribution system at well B handle that situation? So that went into thinking about the importance factors. And then there were other considerations like, what kind of response time or warning would you want to have if there was a contamination event up gradient of your well, upstream of the well, that got detected? How crucial is it to know about that, a few months ahead of time versus so that you can replace that water supply versus, you would have some flexibility for figuring out how to temporarily replace that part of the water supply until, say, treatment came online. So the details are all in that Appendix I. It's not a very long appendix, and it's got a summary table in it that I think will help you really understand what we were getting there at that time. And, that was a snapshot back in the year 2000 or 1999 or whenever that was. It's pretty darn old. You know, that's a quarter of a century. Think about that. Conditions have probably changed a little since then. So I would really encourage people to go back and look strongly at those importance factors and think about what makes sense for the system that you have today and what you want that protection to look like, you know, in terms of the size of the area for the capture zone. So that's what the purplish columns are all about, L through Q. In the other columns there to the left, H, I, J, and K, what I'm after here is I want y'all to think about each well in terms of, you know, you have a current operation that you do, and you may have some projections at your disposal for, like, you know, how might you use that well a little differently, say in 20 years or some future time frame, if there's some, you know, depending on growth projections in your service area. And for the climate change analysis, what we could do is simply look at how does climate change affect the groundwater levels when you're pumping under your annual water rights. We could do that, but we could also look at it under a different pumping scenario if that's of more interest to you and your governing bodies. You know, so let's say that if you have a 10 or 20-year projection of water demand, and that's the planning time frame that's of most interest to your agency, then, you know, maybe think about whether the climate change analysis should look at where the water levels at those wells might be, you know, 20 years into the future under that 20-year level of demand, and with that, with what we think climate change might be doing to the aquifer system 20 years out. And the whole idea behind this analysis is to basically say to ourselves, you know, you'll have a good operating record of, I'm sure, at each well of where your water levels are, when the well's off, when the well's pumping, and what the climate change analysis is going to do is to give you an idea of how much change could occur in the future water level, so that that way you could say, okay, here's a certain pumping record we have. You've got a hydrograph of pumping water levels, and you look at it and say, well, okay, the model's telling us the water levels could be 3 feet lower in the future or 5 feet lower in the future. And that might be because of both increased pumping that you have going on, but also climate change effects on recharge to the aquifer. You would be able to look at that data that you have and be able to say, okay, gosh, maybe if the water levels are 3 feet lower in the future, then that is suddenly going to cause some concerns with regards to where we have the pump set in the well, or where that critical shutoff level is for, you know, the pump before it turns off, or, you know, if it has a VFD, maybe it can be ratcheted back gradually. But the idea behind the climate change is to give you an idea of how much things could change in the future. And so I'd like to run those simulations using information that you think is realistic for that time frame you're most interested in terms of, you know, what the pumping would be. So that's what columns H through K are about. And so that's the information request. We had originally contemplated starting this project in early April, but, you know, here we are about a month or so early. So, you know, from the standpoint of schedule and all that, there's plenty of time here for you all to give some thought to this. And in fact, I'm going to be taking some time off the second half of March through early April, and I'll put all that in the email. But, you know, between me and Dan Kegley, we're around, and, you know, either one or both of us, and available to take questions as you think about this. So watch for some emails coming your way soon, possibly this afternoon, if not early next week. And in the meantime, that's what I had. Any questions?
Not a question, John. I have a comment just because I think that I'm gonna have to change some numbers like these well construction or original numbers for where the pump is set. If you had your wells pulled, had new pump put in, those open interval or top open, bottom open, elevations might have changed from when the well was originally set. So reference that's kind of an important number for when we're looking at climate change, and if we're talking about single digit feet or dozens of feet of aquifer change, having that where your pump openings are is important.
Yeah, very good point. Very good point. Yeah, so that was one reason I was providing the well construction information, is if everybody can review that. 'Cause one of the things I think about in the model is I use that information we have a multi-layer model of the aquifer system. So that kind of information tells me, okay, do I pump the well just from one specific layer, or does it span multiple layers, and how many layers? So that's another reason it would be really good to, cross-check what's in these tables. Again, it's 10-year-old information, if not older.
Yeah, as John pointed out, you'll receive these tables and they'll be populated. But what they won't have is any new construction. I know Rick's got some wells, some other folks, some new wells. We just need to make sure that we capture that same data for each of those new wells also, so.
Yes, and I'll need the coordinates, which I've indicated. We're working in the state plane NAT 83 Harn system. That's what the model is set up in. And so again, I'll give you the coordinates that I have for all the wells that I know of. So if there are any new wells, we'll need that information as well, or at least a good estimate. And if that's a surveying challenge, for some reason, or some other challenge, what you could do is just tell me, how far away is the well from one of your other wells, and
also, you get that information on Google Maps.
True. Yeah, that's another way to do it.
All you have to do is,
Yeah.
that's how I find the wells.
My transducers didn't measure any change in the level of the aquifer at all. Anyone else? I mean, the aquifer level. So as far as it going down, did anybody notice it? Not even fraction.
Over what period of time?
Yeah.
Over the last year even.
Some wells go up and down.
I'm talking about the delta. Did the aquifer drop at all in anyone's well? Not in mine either.
I don't think so. I have to look back at my numbers, but
Well, shame.
There can
You got the big boys. You're on the spreadsheet.
I know there can be some year-to-year variability, usually associated more with if you get a really abnormally dry year. There have been some wells in the valley that have shown that water levels were a little bit lower, in the summers after a year of minimal snowpack and minimal spring runoff, compared to the typical year. So a lot of the idea behind this exercise to say, if you get into a situation like that, what is that difference potentially going to be, and is it going to make or break how a pump's going to be able to keep operating?
John, Spokane County, where Amy's gonna be talking about the monitoring well program that's been going for 25 years. And they get water levels a whole bunch of wells quarterly. Plus, we've had some transducers in wells too, so if you want even more data.
Yeah, I've seen some of that information before. It can be very helpful for understanding how things change seasonally. And
Right, so Amy is the one I think who you should contact. Used to be me, but now it's Amy.
okay, thanks, good to know.
Okay, thanks, John. Does anyone else have any questions? I'm sure, as you receive these spreadsheets, questions come up, you can hit John or Dan or myself and we'll help point you in the right direction. Or even if it's, like coordinate conversion stuff, let me know. I can make that happen.